Danny Garceau is a member of the Bishop Baraga Advisory Board. He is Anishinaabe, and his ancestors include members of several tribes of the Lake Superior Chippewa. Bishop Baraga married his great-grandfather and baptized their children. Danny's great-grandfather helped to build the Catholic Church on Madeline Island for Bishop Baraga. Danny is a lifetime member of the Society of American Indian Government Employees and currently serves as a director on that board and as a director of the Warrior Society. Danny lives in Ishpeming, part of the homeland of his ancestors, with his wife Diane and grandson Logan. He's an active member in many community organizations and serves on several boards. He is also a musician and sings with the Morning Thunder Drum and Till Lake Drum Circles. Deacon H. John Vincent Garceau is a brother to Danny. He is also on the advisory board for the Bishop Baraga Association. Deacon John and his wife have been married for over 45 years. They have 4 grown children and 9 grandchildren. Deacon John was ordained a deacon in the Diocese of Green Bay in 2005. He currently is ministering part-time in the Green Bay area as a hospice chaplain. Deacon John has a very strong spiritual connection with Bishop Baraga and is inspired by Bishop Baraga's commitment, zeal in spreading God's word and love, and compassion for the native people and early settlers of Michigan's Upper Peninsula.
Bonjour, or greetings in Anishinaabe. We hope that you're enjoying Bishop Baraga Days. By way of introduction, my name is John, or Johnny. My brother Dan, or Danny. I'm a deacon in the Diocese of Green Bay. We want to thank you for the Bishop Baraga Association for allowing us to share some of our family connections with you, to share some stories with you today, and also to share some flute songs with you today. I remember as a young man going to St. Peter's Cathedral and praying before the Blessed Sacrament. And then I would always find myself down by the tomb of Bishop Baraga. And I always felt a special connection with Bishop Baraga, but I didn't know why. But there was just somehow that special connection. And as time went on, my brother Dan started researching our genealogy and stumbled upon why I felt that connection, why we have that special connection with Bishop Baraga through some of our ancestors. And I'll let him share with you some of that genealogy and how we came to be connected with Bishop Baraga in a special way.
Bonjour, Wabajiji Maingan, Indigenous Kaz, Migazi and Dodim, Yishpamin and Ojibwe, in the Weekwadang, Ogichada, Anishinaabe, Danny Joe Garceau, Chi Mukiman, Indigenous Kaz. As my brother John said, I did some research on our ancestry. We all grew up knowing that we're Native American, but we didn't grow up on the reservation. We grew up in a small town, Ishpeming. But as life went on, and after I finished my career in the military, I did start to research our Native American ancestry more and found some very interesting connections, and also started to explore the culture of the Anishinaabe, our ancestors. As you mentioned, there's a very special connection that we had. We had a great-great-grandfather that came over from Canada. He was French-Canadian. His name was Francois Lamoureux, and he was a shipbuilder. He was hired by the fur company to build ships on Madeline Island. And he married an Anishinaabe woman, Maria Gaji Gaji. And they started a family, had many kids. He also had a son-in-law who married his oldest daughter, and his name was Jenere. He was Eli Jenere, Hilary Jenere. And both Eli Jenere and Francois Lamoureux were working on Madeline Island when Bishop Baraga got there. And when he got there and asked for a church to be built, it was our great-great-grandfather and his son-in-law, which is also our great-great-grandfather, who actually led in building the church along with some other locals. But the both of them are mentioned by Bishop Baraga in his diaries, since they did take the lead on it and built the church. He also performed their marriages and baptized their children into the Catholic Church too while they were there. So that's our connection with Bishop Baraga, is that connection of our great-grandparents building that first church for him and on Madeline Island in La Pointe, and also marrying and baptizing their children. So that's the connection we had. Where I started to explore, and then my brother drew some interest in it, was the Anishinaabe culture. And a part of that Anishinaabe culture was storytelling, the drum singing, and also flute playing. And so both of us, I started to pick up the flute first when I heard a person play the flute and talked about how healing the flute was, and that it's very hard to have a angry soul or a heart when you're playing the flute. It doesn't play angry music, it only plays soothing music. And so I started to play the flute, and my brother John, he seen I had a flute and he wanted me to play for it, and I was a little shy about it. So for a long time I tell him no, I don't play it. I just play a little bit by myself and that, and finally I got up the courage, and with his encouragement, to play for him, and he really liked the sound of it, and he immediately wanted to start playing it too, and picked up a flute. And then, like what happens when you start playing a flute, you start picking up more than one, and then you have a collection of flutes that you play. So I think a little bit later on, and during this video, we're gonna play some flute for you to show you how it is. But before that, we wanted to get into some storytelling or teachings that the Anishinaabe do. The Anishinaabe culture was an oral history, although there are some old scrolls and records that they did write down on birch bark. For the most part, all their history was passed down orally through stories, and there'd be lessons in those stories. It kind of reminded me growing up in the Catholic Church and in Catholic school, where my favorite part of it was hearing the stories. You know, the stories of the Bible. You know, those were always my favorite part, and then I used to enjoy history too, because to me history was basically storytelling. And in the Anishinaabe culture, that's how they passed down their history, and that's how they passed down their lesson, was with stories. So we're going to tell a few stories, and I think Brother John's going to start off with one of the flute stories about the origination of the flute, and I'll let him go ahead with that now.
So in many Native American circles, the flute is known as the love flute, and the story is told, and I'm not going to tell it today, and you can probably look that up yourself, of how the flute came to be, about a young man and a young woman, and the role the flute played in that. But in the Anishinaabe tradition, it's much different. And I'll share with you the story as it's passed down to us. A long time ago, there was a boy and a girl born within hours of each other in the Anishinaabe village. And as they began to grow up, they were inseparable. As far as everywhere they went, one didn't go there without the other. And the people began to watch them, and they saw the love that these two children had for each other, and the love they had for nature, how they loved all the two-legged and four-legged creatures, and the winged creatures, and the fin creatures, and there's just so much love and respect there, and how they also communicated with the Great Spirit, with God, and how in tune they were with Him. And they were just a joy in the village, and you know, the village just learned so much from them. It was thought that as they got older, maybe they would marry. And sure enough, that time come when they were old enough, and they were married. As far as they had, the village had the biggest celebration that they had ever had. Everybody was so joy-filled and joyous, and the young man and young woman were wed, and they spent time together. But shortly after that, it was time for the young man to go on a hunting trip now. Now that he was married and he was a man, it was time for him to go away. Now the young man and young woman had never been apart. Like I said, they'd been inseparable, and so there was many, many tears shed. And the young man finally climbed on his horse and began to ride away. And the young woman was waving and tears in her eyes, but yet in her heart, she knew that it would only be a couple weeks and he'd be back again, and they would be together again, and it would be a joyful event. So every day went by, and every day seemed like a year. But finally it got to be close to that time when they should be coming home, and she'd go out every evening and look to see if they were coming home, and nope, not this day, nope, not the next day. And yet she had that joyful anticipation, and finally the day came, and she could see off in the distance, she could see the hunting party returning, and her heart just leaped with joy. And she was just so tickled that she would see her husband now again, and they'd be reunited again. And as they got closer, she looked and she couldn't pick him out in the hunting party. She thought he must be behind somebody, or maybe he's lagging behind a little bit. And finally the hunting party got there, and they got down from their horses and said, we're sorry to tell you, but your husband's not coming home. But he was in a hunting accident and we had to bury him there. Well, you can imagine this young bride was overcome with grief she'd never known in her lifetime, sadness that she's never known in her lifetime. She was inconsolable. Days went by and she still wept, her heart heavy with grief. She tried talking to the Creator. The words wouldn't come. Her grief was too big, was too heavy for her. The people tried consoling her. She wouldn't eat. She was just, there was nothing that could lift her spirits. She was used to hearing the Creator, and she prayed that the Creator would talk to her, but again, her grief was too big. She couldn't hear the Creator's voice. So finally she decided she couldn't go on like this, and she thought, I'm just going to leave the village, walk away until I can't walk anymore, and lay down and die and be with my husband. So that day came and she decided to leave the village, unbeknownst to anybody else. And she started walking and walking and walking, and finally she got tired and she laid down. And as she laid down, her eyes closed, and all of a sudden the treetops began to move a little bit. Like many times you hear when you're out in the woods, you could just hear the treetops begin to sway, and the wind in the treetops. And all of a sudden she began to hear this sound that she'd never heard before. It was a beautiful melodic sound, a sound that just pierced her to the heart. And the more she listened, the more her heart began to soften. Her heart began to heal. And before too long, she could hear the Creator's voice again. And the Creator was telling her that he was so sorry that her husband died, but not to worry, that her husband was with him, and one day she would be with him again. But now it was time to stay with her people and continue to teach them as she and her husband had before. And the Creator had such pity for her because he loved her, as far as they had such a close connection. He said, I never want you or your people to not be able to hear my voice again. He said, I'm going to give you an instrument that when you blow on it and play it, you'll be able to hear that sound like you hear now, that beautiful melodic sound. And whether you're whether it's grief that's too heavy in you, or whether it's anger, or whatever it may be, those emotions that come into your heart that are not pure, when you hear that sound, you'll be able to hear my voice again, and you'll be able to find your voice, and we'll be able to heal again. And so that's how the flute came to be to our people. It's a healing instrument, a method of healing. And we know that God can use anything in his creation to heal us, whether it be a beautiful sunset or a babbling brook or the flute or any type of music. But God can use all those things. The Creator can use these things that he's given us to heal us. So what I'd like to have you do now, if you would, I'd like to have you just close your eyes. Put yourself in a place that is special to you. Maybe it's the woods, or maybe it's beside a river somewhere, or maybe it's on the shores of Lake Pichigumi. Wherever is safe for you, wherever is comfortable for you, close your eyes and put yourself there and look into your heart. See if there's anything that needs healing. Maybe there is anger, maybe there's jealousy, maybe there's some hatred, maybe there's some envy. Whatever it may be, close your eyes, open your heart, and open your ears. And as I play, let the Creator speak to you, and let your heart begin to heal.
that was beautiful, Brother John.
And as we go on, there's many more stories. And my brother would like to share with you some of the stories that he'd give us some teaching as well.
Yeah, I was thinking when my brother was playing the flute there, he said, think of a place where you're out in the woods or with the wind blowing through the leaves, and that's where we are right now. We're sitting in a little veterans park in the northern woods of Wisconsin, and there's a river with a waterfall running behind us. There's wind blowing through the trees, all those things that I think inspired the Creator to put into that flute. All the sounds of the birds and animals, and put them in there in like my brother said, a healing way. As you mentioned, and I mentioned earlier too, I love stories. I love hearing them, and now as a grandfather, as a Mishomish, I enjoy telling them too. And I wanted to share a couple of stories with you. In the Anishinaabe tradition, some stories are only told in the wintertime. They're only told certain times of the year. So there's some stories that we don't tell, but then there's other stories that we can tell throughout the year that have different lessons. And there's two stories that I want to share with you today because I feel there's somewhat of a connection, although I think it's all connected. I think the cultures over here in North America might have been different. Their stories might have been different, but in the space of time are connected with the other stories from around the world too. And the first story I wanted to tell you about was about the Great Flood. You know, we all grew up knowing about the story about the Great Flood and how Noah built the ark and got two of all the animals so that they'd be able to start the world over again because God was not happy with the people. They weren't following his way. And over in the Anishinaabe culture, there's a very similar story where the Creator was not happy and decided to start all over again. So sent the rains and the rains and the rains, and there was a great flood. The rivers swelled up, the lakes overflew, and everything was swallowed up by water. Well, when this happened, the Creator didn't have, in this story, did not have Noah. He had Nanabuju, which was kind of like his son or his disciple that he had sent down. It was a piece of him, a part spirit and part human that he brought down to aid the animals and the people on earth. And he'd been wandering around the earth for a long time. But when the flood happened, he too was not spared. Everything was flooded, and he found himself out in the middle of nothing but water, hanging on to a very large log, hanging on, and he finally climbed up on top of the log, and he's sitting there, and the rain had stopped, but he's sitting there, and as far as he can see, all he can see is water. Water to the north, water to the east, water to the south, water to the west. All he sees is water. But every now and then a creature swims up. First of all, a meek, the beaver, he swims up and he hangs on to the log. And then a bigger creature, Mukwa, the bear, he swims up and he hangs on to the log. And so on. Turtles are swimming up. Deer are swimming up. Mice are swimming up. Rabbits, waboos. All these different animals are swimming up and they're hanging on to this big log. And pretty soon he's on this big log sitting there, and there's all these other animals sitting there, and they're talking to him. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? All our land, all our food, everything's gone. Everything's been flooded. And Nanabuju was thinking. He was thinking, and while he was thinking, he was probably praying to his father, the Creator, wanting an idea. And an idea comes into his head. He says, I think I can know how to start giving us some land again. He says, but what I need to do is I need to get some mud at the bottom of the water. I need somebody to go down and get me some mud from the bottom of all this water. So first of all, Amit, the beaver, says, I will do it. I am the best swimmer. I'm the best builder. I get mud all the time from the bottom of the pond to build my houses, to build my dams. And down in the water, Amit goes. And he's down there for several minutes because he can hold his breath a long time. But he comes back up after a couple minutes. He says, it's too deep. I can't go any farther. I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough. So Mukwa, the bear, he says, I'm the biggest. I'm the strongest. I'm bigger. I can reach the bottom. I swim down for fish all the time in the river. And so Mukwa jumps down into the water and swims. And he's down there a couple minutes also. But he comes up and he says, it's really deep. I couldn't even see the bottom. that water is way too deep for me. So then Mong, the loon, says, I am under the water a lot, almost as much as I'm on top of the water. And so Mong dives down underneath the water, and he's down there for 5-6 minutes, down there a long time. And he comes up, and he's grasping for breath because he went down as far. He says, I could see the bottom. I could see it. He says, but I couldn't reach it. I would not have enough air to come up if I did. And so Muskrat says, well, I'll go down and give it a try. I'm under the water a lot too. And all the other animals started to laugh. Little Muskrat, they said, Muckwa couldn't do it. Mong couldn't do it. Amik couldn't do it. How do you think you're going to do it? But while they were still laughing, he just did it. He dove down into the water. He went looking for some mud. He was down there 5 minutes. He was down there 10 minutes. He was down there 15 minutes. He was down there a long time. And everybody just figured that he had drowned. He'd never come up again. And just about when they were about to give up hope, up comes Muskrat floating to the top of the water. Barely a breath in him. But as he floats up, Nana Buju picks him up out of the water. And he opens up his little paw, and in his little paw there's just a little bit of mud. And with that little bit of mud, he looked at Muskrat, and Muskrat gave his last breath and passed away. All the other animals were so sorry that they doubted Muskrat. They were so sorry that he passed away. But Nana Buju told him, he says, Muskrat gave his life for us. He gave his last breath going down to get this mud so that we can have new land. And so all the other animals, they said a prayer. They said a prayer thanks to Muskrat and thanks to the Creator for giving him the strength to do this. And so with that mud, Nana Buju picked it up and says, now I need some place to put this. And he looked at Turtle. And he says, Turtle, you have such a nice hard shell. It'd make a nice place to start an island, to start new land. And Turtle says, well, I don't know. I don't know if I want to carry the whole world on my back. And Nana Buju says, you know, Brother Muskrat, he gave his life for everybody else. He says, sometimes you can't be selfish. Sometimes you have to give of yourself for other people. So Turtle says, all right, I'll do it. So Nana Buju, he took that mud and he put it on the back of the turtle's back. And as he put it there, all of a sudden the wind started to blow from all 4 directions. They blew from the north, and they blew from the east, and they blew from the south and the west. And they came in from all directions, blowing on to that piece of mud. And as that happened, that piece of mud started to grow. As it started to grow, so did the turtle. The turtle started to grow along with all the mud. And as those winds came in that were sent from the Creator, it started to build that land on the back of the turtle. And the turtle got bigger and bigger, and the mud got bigger and bigger. And as it got bigger, birds started to fly, and they started to drop seeds that they had been carrying with them. And those seeds started to grow grass, and they started to grow other plants, and eventually they started to grow trees. And all this was happening at such a fast pace in a magical way. And pretty soon, there was this large island with vegetation on it, with trees on it. Food was growing again. And all the animals were able to let go of the log and swim onto the turtle's back. And from there, that's how the land that we call Turtle Island got its name, is that we believe that this land was created on the back of a turtle after the Great Flood. And that's the story of Turtle Island and about the Great Flood in our Anishinaabe history. I wanted to share one more story with you that's kind of related to it. It has to do with the flood, and it was after the flood happened. And after the flood happened, there was a time when the Anishinaabe people had started again. The Creator had gave his teachings, and they were following them. But after a long period of time, people started to forget. They started to forget, and the Creator was aware of this. And he wasn't hearing the prayers from the Anishinaabe anymore. He wasn't seeing them practicing the teachings of taking care of the land, the teachings of taking care of their brothers and sisters, the animals. And so he brought the animals together, and he was going to give them a warning. He says the Anishinaabe have once again wandered off the path that they were taught initially about taking care of each other, taking care of you. They're no longer praying. They don't understand the importance of prayer. So I'm afraid I might have to start over again. I'm afraid I'm going to have to flood the land again. And all the animals were, oh no, 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 please don't do that. Gitche Manitou, Creator, don't do that. There's got to be another way. And the Creator says, well, they forgot. I don't think any of the Anishinaabe remember. He says, but I'll tell you what. He says, I'll give you 4 days to find some Anishinaabe that remember those teachings, that are still practicing the prayers, still doing the things that they were taught. And he says, Migizi, the eagle, says, I'm going to send you out searching for those people. You'll have 4 days to fly over the lands and bring back news if you can see any of them that are practicing those teachings. So Migizi says, I can do that. I can fly far, I can fly high, I can see far. Says, I will do that. And the animals were happy. They had confidence in the eagle, and they had confidence that he would find somebody. On the first day at sunrise, the eagle takes off and he flies. And he flies far. He flies across the Great Plains, flies across the plateaus and the steppes and on the mountain ridges. And he comes back at sunset and he tells the Creator, he says, I did not see any today. So the next morning he gets up and he takes off, and again he throws out his wings and he soars all over the ocean shores, along the swamplands, across the grasslands, the prairies, and he comes back at the end of the second day and he says, I did not see anybody today. So on the third day he takes off, and again at sunrise he stretches his wings and he catches the wind and he starts soaring over the deserts, and he soars up some of the river valleys, and he flies all day long. So when he comes back, and again he says he did not see. Migizi was starting to get a little saddened, and the animals creatures were all starting to get a little worried. But on the fourth day he took off, and he had renewed hope that he would find somebody. And he takes off and he spreads his wings and he flies over the woodlands and the forests and along the lake shores and the northern rivers. And he flies all day over the small mountains and the bluffs. But as the sun is starting to set, he's starting to turn back, and he's worried he did not find anybody. But at just that moment, he sees this gray mist coming up from the treetops. So he starts circling down from way above. And as he gets closer, he sees it's not gray mist, but it's actually smoke. It's smoke coming up from a little clearing in the woods. And where that smoke's coming up, there's a small fire. And along with the small fire, there's Anishinaabe around there. There's Nokomis and Mishomis, Grandma and Grandpa. There's Mom and Dad there. There's other small grandchildren and children that are around the fire. And they're listening to Mishomis as he holds up his shell with sage and sweetgrass and cedar in there. And he's burning this. And as he's burning this and sending that smoke up to the Creator, as he was taught, he's saying his prayers. He's thanking the Creators. He's saying, Miigwech Gitche Manitou, thank you, God, for all the blessings that you give us. Miigwech Gitche Manitou, for all the teachings that you taught us. And he keeps thanking him for all those things. He thanks him for the wind. He thanks him for the earth. He thanks him for fire. And he thanks him for the creatures, the winged creatures, the fin creatures, the four-legged creatures, the two-legged creatures. He's thanking for all of them. And then he asks Gitche Manitou. He's asking him to continue to help him. Help me, Gitche Manitou. Help us, Gitche Manitou. Help us remember those 7 teachings that you gave us about truth, about honesty, about humility, about respect, about love, about wisdom, and about courage. And as he finishes this, he finishes those prayers up. The smoke is rising, and the Migizi, the eagle, he follows that smoke and he circles that smoke up, and he goes rising higher and higher, higher up into the sky. And he goes all the way back up to the Creator. And he comes back to the Creator and he tells him what he saw. He tells him about seeing this Anishinaabe family and what they were doing. They were praying, and what they were praying about, giving thanks and asking for help. And this made the Creator, made God feel really good. And so he told the animals. He told the animals about this too and shared it with them. And when they went back into the woods, they shared it with the Anishinaabe. Because back before, long before, the animals could talk with the Anishinaabe. There was a language that they understood, and they were able to talk back and forth. And so the animals shared that with it. And this made the Anishinaabe feel good, that they weren't going to get flooded, that they were saved and why they were saved. But they also gave thanks to Migizi, the eagle, and they all for bringing the prayers, taking those prayers up to the Creator and bringing them back to the Creator to help the Creator hear them. And so now, when you see Native Americans, you'll see that a lot of them use eagle feathers. They use them sometimes in their headdresses. They'll sometimes use them on their staffs, which are like their flags. They'll use them on some of their regalia, and they'll use them when they're fanning sage, when we're using sage when they're doing prayers and purifying in that too. And so they always remember the eagle for saving them and carrying their prayers up, and always hold them at a very high level of esteem as one of God's creatures and the person that helps bring their prayers to the Creator. So I wanted to share those two stories with you, the world flood story, as us Anishinaabe know, and then also about how we almost had a second flood, but we're saved because there was some Anishinaabe that were still praying, still remember God's teachings, and how the eagle, Migizi, brought those prayers up to the Creator.
Thank you, brother, for sharing that. And like we said, I mean, that's how we learn as far as the teachings are passed down, and just like reading the stories and in the scriptures, like my brother Dan said, when being in Catholic school and hearing those stories and that. And as I was sharing with my brother today, when I knew he was going to tell the story of the eagle, I said, you know, it's kind of funny because when we look at John the Evangelist, the Apostle John, and the symbol for him is an eagle, and how he's kind of noted as most spiritual of writers, and how he lifts us up to God. His gospel lifts us up to God, and so I think that eagle story connects with that very well as too. And as we played the flute before, as Brother Dan said, we both have many different keys of flutes, and flutes come in, like I said, different keys, small, and Dan's got one that's even smaller than this. We have large flutes, and they get higher sounds, lower sounds, and you know, a lot of times they say if you want to learn to play the flute, watch nature and try and imitate nature. For example, if you see a bird flying, try and imitate that when you're playing the flute, or if you see a babbling brook, or whatever it may be, the wind blowing in the trees. And so we have the different keys of flutes that give us different sounds, and like the smaller flutes, to me, they're more lighthearted, more like a little bird flitting around, and some of the lower ones are kind of more like that wind swaying, or you know, just touch our hearts in a different way. And so my brother and I thought maybe we'd share a couple more songs on the flute before we go, and give you a little bit more taste of what that flute music is like.
Yeah, before we start that, Brother John, I just thought maybe we could talk a little bit more about Bishop Baraga too, because as my brother John says, you know, he's always felt a connection with them, and so have I, because he was so much different than a lot of other people. And reading his diary, I noticed that he changed too. He was a very educated man, a very smart man, with a big heart. But I noticed reading his diaries that he was growing the whole time he was over here too. He came over here with a certain belief about the Anishinaabe, about Native Americans, that changed as he started to work with them, as he started to bring them to the Catholic religion, and spent more time with them. He also grew closer to understanding them too, with a greater respect. He realized that they weren't the savages that everybody called them, that actually they were very spiritual people that just weren't understood because people would look at them through their history and eyes, and not try to see them through their own history and eyes. But once he started to work with them and started to live with them, he realized that they were very spiritual, that everything they did was connected to God and the Creator, that they gave thanks all the time, like in that story that they were taught to, is, you know, you start the day thanking God, you end the day thanking God, and many times during the day you'll find opportunities to thank God too. And so he realized that the Anishinaabe people were a very spiritual people, and he held them very dear to himself, and he gave a lot of himself to the Anishinaabe people. When he seen that they weren't being treated right by other people, whether it was the British or the Americans, when they were moving in, he would try to rectify that, and gave of his own self. He gave many of his possessions and his money, and even when they were doing the great removal back after the Civil War, when they wanted to move all the Native Americans to the west side of the Mississippi, he knew that they did not want to leave their homeland, And so he had purchased a whole bunch of land himself and deeded it over to the Native Americans so that they'd have legal claim to stay here. So Bishop Baraga was a very special person. I wanted to share that before we do flute playing.
I mean, I think that's good to share, because a lot of times there's misinformation out there and people hear different things. And like you said, reading his book, The Life of Bishop Baraga, you come to see just how much he loved the Anishinaabe people and how he considered them his children, so to speak. And like I said, how he gave of himself. And it's phenomenal to just see how a man can be so committed to God and so committed to the Anishinaabe people, as well as the European settlers up in the Upper Peninsula. So thank you for sharing that, brother.
Well, I guess we'll play some flute now.
I guess so. So this is the key of B flute, and it's one of the more light-hearted flutes. And I mean, as you can see, when you look at flutes, there's holes in the flute, and the different, some of the holes are bigger, some are farther apart. And so the smaller a flute, if you're ever going to begin to play a flute, you want to get a smaller flute, because the holes are closer together and they're easier to finger. And if anybody can play, I mean, if I can play a flute, anybody can, because I've tried different instruments and cannot read music, have not been able to play an instrument. But like I said, when I saw my brother playing when we were out kayaking one day and heard how beautiful it was, I knew that I wanted to do that. And I think the Creator blessed me with that, with being able to play somewhat. So we'll play a little bit, and you can hear the difference in how lighthearted this is and how light it is compared to when we told you the flute story. So. Again, makes you think of just the birds flitting around or the butterflies flitting around, just how beautiful it is. And here's one even just a little bit higher pitch, and maybe bring something else to mind for you. When we have flutes, and you can hear some of them have a different volume too. They call like a 1-fire flute, 2-fire flute, 3-fire flute. And when the Indians had their fires, the fires would be so far apart, and they talked about how loud the flute was, whether you could hear them 1 fire apart, 2 fire apart, 3 fire apart. And the flute that I have here was made in Canada. It's a handmade flute. If you can see it, it's just made from wood, and that was found on the beach. And it's a special flute, and it's called a 3-fire flute because it has more volume to it. So it's a flute I like to use outside because it just travels further. And this is my brother's favorite flute. He says when I die, he gets this flute. So
I mean, other than the great memories, I always have I do kind of covet his flute a little bit.
And this is in the key of F. When you hear Native American flute being played, usually it's F or G, which is that more traditional sound. And so when you hear it, you probably understand that it's in that key that usually you're used to and accustomed to hearing to. And this, I think, too, is an F too, isn't it, brother? That you have?
Yeah, this one right here was made by the same person,
Yep,
right?
same person
And
in Canada.
you can see it's a little bit of a bend, so it was made from a branch, but also in the key of F. You mentioned there's different keys of flute. That was beautiful too, John. I love the sound of that flute. I don't know if I could make it sound as good as you, but that is definitely a very sweet flute that maybe one day I'll get to play. I play with a musical group called Wawiea. It means circle or join the circle. It's a Native American indigenous rock group. I really have fun playing with them. But one of the flutes that I tend to play quite a bit there is the E flute, the E bass, because it's got a lower sound, so it really complements the music that we're playing. I have to play different flutes for different songs because they're in different keys, but a lot of them, the E flute will really complement it because it's got a much lower sound. So I'm just going to play a little bit of that, so again you can see the difference in the voice between the small flutes and how the different flutes sound. Yeah, so you can see that that's got a much lower sound to it.
Thank you, brother. I thought maybe before we sign off, maybe if you had the story about how the drum came to be, a short story, how the drum and how it's the heartbeat. And
I could. So I'll grab mine. You can have yours in your hands still. I know it's a thing of comfort. As I mentioned, we mentioned that our stories have been oral and history's passed down through those stories. The drum wasn't always with the people, and there's different drums, but the first drum that came to the people was a large drum. And the way it came about was Anishinaabe, native people, were fighting amongst themselves. Villages were fighting against villages. People within the villages, wigwams against wigwams. People weren't getting along. And there was a woman that really saddened her heart to see all this conflict, all this fight. And so she started to pray to the Creator, asking for help, to help this bickering, to help this arguing, to help this conflict from happening amongst the people. And so in her dream, the Creator God came to her and told her about building this instrument, about taking out a hollowed log and stretching a deer hide over it and making it tight so that when you hit the top of it, it would make a sound. He told her all this in her dream. And in his dream, he says, this drum is not for you to play. You don't have that conflict in you. This drum is for you to gift to the men of your tribe, to keep them from doing it, from the conflict. And so when she woke up, she shared that dream with all the people in the tribe. And so they gathered out an old log, and that log, they took a deer hide and they stretched it over the log and they tied it tight around there so that when they hit it, it made a sound. And so then she also continued to tell about in the dream how they were to get sticks, and with those sticks, they were all to beat together at the same time on that drum. And then as they were beating on that drum, they could begin to sing. And when they sang, they could sing stories about their history, about their blessings, about all the things that they were thankful for. And so when they did this, the men sat around the drum and they played it, and they started to beat in unison. And as they beat in unison, they started to feel together. They felt that togetherness. And they started to share their stories. As they were drumming, one person would sing out that story, and then everybody would come in and sing out the story with them too. And being around that drum gave them a real sense of brotherhood, of togetherness. And they didn't feel that anger with anybody anymore. And so after they were doing this for a long time, some of the other villages would be wandering past, and they could hear that sound in the distance. And when they heard that sound, they got curious and they came. And when they came, they seen all the men of that one village, and they were sitting around and they were singing songs and they were playing. And they got closer and they wanted to share. And the men that were there, they said, sure, join the circle, join the drum. And they pulled up and they too began to sing around the drum. And then when they left, they went back to their own villages and built their own drums so that they could sit around and play and tell their stories and sing. And so the drum became this big gift that drove away the conflict and brought people together. And this was a gift that the woman prayed for, the women prayed for, and her prayers were answered again from the Creator, and gave that gift through a dream, which they incorporated. And that's why drum, which they call the heartbeat of Mother Earth, is so important to the Anishinaabe, because it was a gift from the Creator. It was a gift from women to men to help them remember and to bring them together as brothers, and so that they weren't in conflict. So that's the story I remember hearing about the drum.
Thank you, brother. So Miigwech, Chi-miigwech, thank you very much for allowing us to share a little bit about our connection with Bishop Baraga today. Some of the Anishinaabe traditions that have been passed down to us, and my brother Dan's such a great storyteller. Always loved listening to him tell the stories, and I guess as we were growing up, we were always told we were storytellers. So
it was not.
But he's using it in a good way, and so we thank you for that. And again, thank you, Bishop Baraga Association, for letting us spend time with you today. Hope you continue to enjoy your day.
Giga Baba Win, Bama P. Those are a few ways to say until we see you later, because goodbye there's not a word for goodbye in Anishinaabe. There's just everybody says until we see again, because we believe we'll all see each other again at one time.